Welcome to the Fit as a Mama Bear podcast. I'm Shelby, a certified strength coach, nutrition coach, mama to two, and all-around health nut. This show is about a little bit of everything healthy, fit, and natural related. So if you're striving to smash goals, eat better, feel better, and enjoy the occasional mom rant, this is the place for you. You're listening into episode 20 today, where I'm chatting to Michael Collins, founder of SugarAddiction.com and board chairman of Food Addiction Institute. So thanks for catching today's episode. I'm really excited about the episode because it's one super close to my heart. One thing that I'm extremely particular about regarding my kids' diets is reducing sugar. And I mean all sugars. I never went with the typical rice cereal as their first foods. And up until last year, even their birthday cakes, yes, the typical first birthday smash cake, was sugar-free and homemade. It looked terrible, to be perfectly honest. I'm very firm on what my kids eat because I truly believe it shapes their lives and their health, not to mention their taste buds within the first few years of their life. Unfortunately, sugar is marketed to our kids far more than we even realize, and often us mamas fall into the trap of grabbing what is easy instead of what is nourishing. And of course, I want to help fix that. So today we're going to chat about what effects sugar has on our kids, what kinds of typical kids' foods contain sugar, and some actionable steps you can do to help your kids cut sugar from their daily diet. With me here today is Michael Collins, and as I mentioned in the intro, he's the founder of SugarAddiction.com and board chairman of the Food Addiction Institute. He's been completely sugar-free for over 30 years and has worked closely with others to help them regain their lives from sugar addiction. So I know that he too is passionate about helping kids cut sugar from their diets. Before we get into the bulk of the show, Michael, welcome to the Fit as a Mama Bear podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and kind of how you came to be in your field?
Well, I have a short version. I have the podcast version, but I can answer any questions after that. It usually brings up more questions than it answers. But, I was a regular kid. I grew up like I thought everyone else did. My mom was my favorite sugar junkie. She loved sugar, and she was always had a stash somewhere. She thought we didn't know where it was, but we did. But we always had sugar around the house. I mean, we ate literally bread and butter sugar sandwiches and brown sugar sandwiches and Kool-Aid with 3 times the recipe and sugar in it. And, if we didn't put enough sugar on our cereal and scrape up maybe a quarter or half inch of sugar at the end with the milk, we didn't put enough sugar there. And we had unfettered access to that sugar bowl sitting there on the table for our cereal. We were not regulated at all. It was very strange. When in today's world, it would be very strange. And candy of all kinds, whatever. So it just kind of continued. About 13, I didn't realize, and I don't think a lot of people realize, that it was changing how I felt, how I felt it, whether I was angry or sad. I mean, I would have sugar or whatever, and because it was almost free and around the house, I would just grab it. And I don't think anyone realizes this is the part this is the 2 and 2 that people need to put together. So when I got to be about 13 or 14, I ran into beer and alcohol and drugs, and that party lasted until I was about 28, and I got sober. And as I was getting sober, I realized that and a lot of the people that I was getting sober with, they were substituting sugar for their addictive substance, sugar, caffeine, nicotine. They were basically not doing, it was a little bit better, but really they were pounding, and people were gaining 20, to hear about the freshman 15. Well, in recovery, it's like the freshman 50, people joke, getting heavier and getting diabetes diagnosis. So I kind of started studying it, and I ran across a book called Sugar Blues, and Sugar Blues was written in the 70s. Redone in the 80s and promoted in the 80s. And the guy that wrote it was married to Gloria Swanson, the famous movie star. And they met at a party, and he was putting 2 lumps of sugar in his coffee, and she said from behind him, "I wouldn't have that in my house, let alone my body." and they ended up marrying each other and promoted that book pretty widely. And I just really took to it. It had a great history lesson, and but it didn't really catch on because back then they were demonizing demonizing sugar and fat, and sugar was being replaced in all of our foodstuffs in the 70s and 80s. But anyway, I studied it and I got into it, and I raised a couple of sugar-free kids from the womb till they were 6 years old. And after that, they only had sugar once a month, maybe if they were lucky, at an outside birthday party for their entire childhood. So
that makes my heart happy.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, and I had a regular life. I mean, this was kind of scary back then. People were not into it, and the sugar producers were big outfit. So about 10 years, I had a regular business career in life. And about 10 years ago, I grabbed the name sugaraddiction.com, and I started to give out information about this and stuff. But it wasn't until about 3 or 4 years ago when we started coaching and online groups and stuff that people really started getting success, and I started to really understand how it was done. And I was elected chairman of the Food Addiction Institute and stuff. So it's been a little bit of a wild ride, long time, but I haven't had any sugar of any kind in, like you say, 30 years. But I think my proudest accomplishment is the kids and the raising them sugar-free. And that experiment worked. I mean, it really did. I really genuinely believe that first 1,000 days changes the way people's brain develops, for sure. And a lot of other parts of their body too, but for sure their brain. And it definitely worked on my kids. I mean, I'm average intelligence, I think, maybe a little above average, but my kids are like rocket scientist smart. So anyway, that's my short version. I can answer any questions.
I love it. I love that you were able to get to 6 before having any real introduction to sugar. Like, that's amazing and a huge accomplishment, because it's hard nowadays to keep them away from it. I feel like everyone is giving it to them.
I know. We fought with the parents and the grandparents and the schools, the Montessori school, the parents of other children. They thought we were depriving them. We really did. But a couple of anecdotes from my stuff is, you talk about that first birthday cake. I mean, I got to dig up these pictures. They're somewhere in my archives, but they just threw it all over themselves, but it didn't look like anything, but it didn't have any sugar in it for sure.
Oh no, mine looked terrible.
it didn't rise at all. It didn't do anything. It's kind of sat there, but whatever. And I mean, when the kids were, they didn't know what it was. Like, you ever see this episode where you're in a grocery store and there's a child in the cart, stuck in the cart, trying to reach the candy, screaming at the top of their lungs to get to that candy?
Yes, I have.
My kids did not even know what that stuff was. They would build it like blocks. They thought they were colored blocks. They were paper. They'd be playing with it. And I said, quit playing with it. But they didn't really want it because they didn't know even what it was at 3 and 4 and 5 years old.
So that's kind of how it worked with us also. Now, for grocery shopping, as soon as my girls, we did baby-led weaning, and as soon as they could kind of eat, they were allowed to have a piece of fruit while we grocery shopped. It kept them calm. They didn't want things. They got to munch on something, and that's still going to this day. But now they grab mushrooms and green beans. Everybody looks at us funny. But
that used to happen to us. They'd walk right up into a restaurant, and we'd like feed them from the salad bar. So they'd have all these vegetables, and they'd say, "How do you get your kids to eat?" Yeah. I say, "You don't give them anything else. That's what they eat. And they like it."
That's been us too, is they really just don't know. They're starting to now because my oldest is in school, but they just didn't know any different. Like, that's just what we eat at home. We all eat the same thing. So but I do get I get told I'm depriving them a lot, and that gets me a little bit eye twitchy, because in my mind, they're not. It's better for their health, but also we do have treats. They're just different kinds of treats.
Sure.
They're homemade. They just use different ingredients, that kind of thing. But I do get that quite frequently.
That's amazing, because it's like there's not that many of us out there, and it's just now starting to be more popular. And this idea that other people are telling you you're depriving them, and it's like ridiculous.
Yeah. It drives me bananas.
The science is so, I mean, we can't diagnostically say all the maladies that sugar causes yet, but damn, we're close, man. Well, and the most important stuff is the brain chemical stuff, the brain reward system. That little infant, and you're playing with its brain reward systems, please. I mean, it's crazy talk. So,
you kind of got the ball rolling for me there. So why don't we talk about that for a second? So why don't you give us a little bit more background on what sugar does, both short-term and long-term? Because I do think that there are kind of affects both ways that we don't realize.
Sure. Well, the most important part that's come to the fore in the last 5 years is the stuff I like to talk about. With a recovery and addiction background, one of the main things that people understand, every diet worth its salt, everything, 95+% of all diets all say reduce the white stuff, white sugar and white flour. And they do that so you could lose weight. But the problem is there's also a corresponding statistic of 95%, and this is lore, this is in all of the scientific literature, that 95% of people that lose any significant amount of weight gain it all back in the first year and then some, right? They add to it. And so what's the reason? So it seems like if they can have success, why wouldn't they keep that? And really what it is that their brain reward system is being hijacked by the sugar, by the fructose actually, their GABA, their norepinephrine, their dopamine, their serotonin, and the big one, oxytocin, and even their adrenals are being hijacked by sugar. And they have used, like I mentioned in my little bio, they've used sugar to manage their emotions over, like their parents used to do it when they were screaming, they give them a cookie. They've managed their emotions unconsciously all the way into adulthood with this legal product that's legal to give to a 1-year-old. And now they are, and they don't understand why they can't put the stuff down long-term, right? And as far as physically long-term, there are 147 different maladies, and the studies, the peer-reviewed studies are all over the internet. You can just find them, just look them up, with diabetes and heart disease and gout. It just goes on and on. The list is endless of the things that physical maladies, but I think the important part to stay off and to get off sugar is centered in the now discovered science of the brain reward systems being affected.
That's interesting. I actually hadn't considered that aspect, to be perfectly honest, but you're right, because that is the staple, is to make them happy, give them sugar.
Yeah.
We, in our first week of school, so I was really nervous about my daughter going to JK because obviously we eat very differently. And the first day of school, she came home and she was like, the teacher gave out Smarties. So my eyes twitching and I'm like, did she now? What for? And it was literally because they sat in their seats properly and colored. And my eye twitched, I think it actually twitched. And I was like, if you do want to, I don't agree with rewarding that fully, because that you just have to do what you're told. I'm sorry, you don't get rewarded all the time for doing things that you have to do. But if you are going to reward, what's wrong with stickers for a 4-year-old, or stamps, or any possible other thing than food, because food's not a reward. And so it was funny because before I even talked to the teacher, I told my daughter, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to talk to your teacher because I just don't agree with that. I went in to talk to the teacher the next day and my 4-year-old had already talked to her for me and told her that she didn't need candy because she'd rather have stickers.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a proud mom moment. So,
That's
but
great.
It is done. That's just the go-to, is reward kids with random food.
Well, no, I think it's the unwinding of this, of 300 years of enculturation of sugar into the food system and the reward systems of parties and birthdays and everything.
Yeah.
That is going to take time. Dr. Lustig, the eminent researcher about sugar, who's been a pediatric endocrinologist for most of his career and is now really fighting this. He says that it's going to take 20 or 30 years for this to turn around. But we're on the right side of history. This is going to happen, like seatbelts in cars and drinking and driving and smoking in public places. When the science says that this is what's happening, it takes time to turn it around, but it is going to happen. And like you're doing and like I did, it has to start with the next generation, because the power of the addictive nature of this stuff is, believe me, I work with adults all day, every day, and it is really hard for an adult with a decent sugar habit to get off it and obtain 100% abstinence, even though they know how many health benefits they derive.
Yeah, I know it's true. It is rather addictive. Let's talk about short-term aspects of giving kids sugar, though. So obviously, every parent is going to know that when kids have sugar, they go crazy and then they crash.
It's so true.
But let's talk more about focus. And I did want to get your opinion on shaping taste buds. So this isn't something I've researched. It's just something that seems like common sense in my mind, that starting your kids off early, very young, with sugar-loaded foods is going to shape their taste buds. So then they're obviously not going to want healthy alternatives later on.
Oh, I agree 100%. I know that I had succeeded as a parent when my boys were about 9 years old and I chopped up carrots, green beans, celery or something. I brought them over to them when they're watching TV and they said, yum. It's like, they were like really interested. They ate it all up, the whole plate of these veggies, right? And so I really genuinely believe that you're 100% correct. And this is actually proven out with adults in a lot of cases. A lot of the adults that I work with, once they get off of the sugar for 90 solid days of abstinence, when they ingest or re-ingest sugar, it tastes too syrupy sweet. It's like, and if you know anything about I think it's Michael Moss or something. There's a book called Fat, Sugar, Salt, I think it's called. And what it studies is it's called the bliss point. And the bliss point is a literal engineered point where the combination of sugar, salt, and fat is entered into a food product. And they test it over and over and over and over again. Mouth feel, mouth crunch, all these testing things that they test in laboratories with consumer reports, consumer kind of people, consumer focus groups. And they find this bliss point, like the Doritos is a perfect crunch, a perfect taste, a perfect salt. And they do this over and over and over. And that's how they get people addicted to these products. So this actually exists on the other side, if you will, the side of the chocolate makers and the sugar makers and the chip makers and all these people. They have this process. So yes, 100%, you are training your taste buds, your children's taste buds. My kids do not have any, they're older now, they're like 30 years old now, but they have no draw to sugar, no unnatural draw to sugar. They can literally take it or leave it. And it's like, because I just don't think they grew up knowing that this product would affect their emotional well-being in some way, that they could change and alter their emotions and their state and how they felt and get a little rise in self-esteem. And so when that happens and you have a child who's not raised with it, they are trained in a better way to manage their own emotions. They've got to, talk to mommy. They've got to get a hug. They've got to call their friend. They have to deal with you have to get down on their level and you have to ask them what's going on, what's wrong. You can't just stick a cookie in their mouth and say you're busy. And it's, I don't make that as a indictment of parenting, but I just say that shortcut should not be available to folks and they should stop doing it.
Taking a bit of a break here. Are you a coffee addict? Because with 2 kids, I totally am. Actually, I've become kind of a snob when it comes to it. Like everything else in my diet, I strive for health, and that doesn't change when it comes to my coffee addiction, which is why I love Four Sigmatic coffee blends. These blends are made with mushrooms, which you think would be gross, but is actually delicious. Mushrooms, chaga mushrooms especially, have been said to boost your immune system, slow the aging process, and fight inflammation. So getting them into your diet regularly is a great idea. And what better way than with a morning cup of coffee? Four Sigmatic has all sorts of coffee blends depending on what your preference is, but I'm a sucker for the coffee with lion's mane because I find it to be such a great morning kickstart. And if I'm craving something before bed or I need a killer sleep, my go-to is the Reishi Elixir. It tastes delicious and it's super calming. So if you want to up your health game, check out foursigmatic.com and use the coupon code MAMABEAR to save 10% on your first order. Now, outside of typical things like candy and chips, because everyone is going to hopefully realize that those are not awesome foods, what day-to-day foods are kids eating that contain sugars that we're maybe not realizing?
Yeah, great question. Almost everything in a bag, a box, or can. Anything, it's 84, I think, percent, but it's above 80% of anything that comes in a bag, a box, a can. A plastic wrap of any kind has sugar in it, or high fructose corn syrup, or any of the 56 or 7 other names for sugar. The one thing you have to watch out for, and I'll probably ruffle a few feathers on this, is to not substitute too much fruit and fruit juices. It's the fructose that's the offending molecule in this, right? Yes, the packaged foods of every kind have it in it in some way, shape, or form. But fruit juice carries so much fructose that freshly squeezed organic fruit or orange juice has as much fructose as a Coca-Cola in it. And when that hits the child's liver, and think about an adult, but think about a child, when it hits a small child's liver, the effects are the same, both in brain chemical interruption, if you will, dopamine, serotonin, and in how it hits the liver, because fructose can't be processed any other way in the body. It has to be processed through the liver. And fructose malabsorption and fructose intolerance are actually physical maladies which have entire food plans for them. And most people don't even know they exist. So one of the things I would caution, along with the bags and boxes and cans, is go easy on the fruit juice. One study I think you would love, and with your research and how you're doing it with the kids, is just recently, this is like November, like only not even a month ago from when we were speaking, the American Dental Association, the American Pediatric Dental Association, the American Association of Pediatric Physicians, the American Heart Association, and one other, I can always forget the last one, but came out with a joint statement. Now, this is the first time in history that any 4 groups of medical societies ever cooperated on anything, okay? And they announced it through the Robert Wood Johnson Association or Foundation, which is one of the largest nonprofits in the world, that children between 0 and 5 should have 0, not little, not a modest amount, 0 sugar-sweetened beverages, okay? And so this is, you can look it up and put it on your website or whatever, and put a link to the study and everything, but it really is a movement forward for the kids and for society, this study and this cooperative joint announcement between all those medical associations about children and sugar-sweetened beverages. Now, it doesn't mention the candy and the sugar and everything else, but as far as drinking your sugar, that's a no-no now.
That's a huge step forward.
Right? I agree. I mean, I think it's just the greatest. It was so exciting to hear that. I mean, I think that was exciting because plus with the American Heart Association in there.
Yeah.
I think it was a big thing for adults, but the idea that they actually said no, 0, I mean, they didn't even give a recommendation of a little. 0 sugar-sweetened beverage for children from 0 to 5. And I love that.
I do too. So for anyone listening, I do have a blog post on this that I'll link to about why we don't use juice boxes. They hurt my eye. But what you can
that eye is very good. It's very sensitive, very, very, very sensitive.
But what you can use instead, a few things that we use coconut water. For some reason, my girls just adore coconut water. So we do have a mini glass of that in the morning, but we also use chilled loose leaf tea. So I will brew up some herbal tea, I'll throw it in the fridge, chill it, and then they have reusable juice boxes for me to trick them when we go to parties that they're having juice. But those are a couple of the things we use instead of rocking actual juice boxes, because my kids it'd kill their stomachs to have an actual juice box now.
Oh yeah, it would, for sure.
Now, when we talk about the names of sugar, so that's one of the problems I think with a lot of moms reading food labels is it rarely says sugar on the food label. Right. So do you want to give us a couple of names or a couple of words that sugar kind of manifests underneath that we can look for when we're trying to find half decent things?
Oh, yeah. One of the things, and if I had to do this over again, I gave them some treats from the health food store that I thought might have been better till the movie, That Sugar film came out from out of Australia, where the guy ate health food from the health food store for 60 or 90 straight days, gained like 40 pounds, and everything went crazy. But the answer to your question is obviously high fructose corn syrup, but barley malt is probably one of the biggest offenders in health food stores. barley malt, anything with an OSE at the end of it, toast, fructose. And one of the things that's been I found really prevalent, and I actually believe this is the reason for the flavored waters growth, is they're sneaking under the laws of natural, anything that says natural added products, or I think it's natural flavorings, is actually fructose, granulated fructose, right? And moms think, or everyone thinks, that the word or the use of fructose, because it's quote unquote a fruit sugar, makes a difference, when in actuality it's worse. Agave is another one in the health food stores, or that they're trying to sneak in, which is like 60 to 90% fructose. It's like they make tequila out of it. Agave syrup, agave. There's just, like I said, anything with an OSE at the end of it, dextrose, anything that sounds like a chemical experiment with an OSE at the end is probably a sugar.
Okay, and I'd like to point out too that even when something says cane sugar or coconut palm sugar, while in your mind they may seem like healthier sugar variations, they still break down as a sugar. They're still a sugar.
Oh, so that's just table sugar.
So it is something that you still want to avoid, or at least reduce in your day-to-day stuff.
100%. That's absolutely true.
Now, for moms whose kids are already eating sugar, what are some of the things that they can do to kind of wean their kids off, to scale back, and kind of how long is that addiction going to take, or how long is it going to take to break?
That's a great question. And when I do these, usually I break this down, and you're one of the first, I think maybe the first that I've ever talked to who has started from the beginning. And so I break it down into the new pregnancies and like the 0 through 5, like the Robert Wood Johnson announcement. And those folks, those kids, they don't know what it is, and they're fine. Where the difficulty comes in is, like you say, kids that have already been exposed to sugar in their early days, and now they're between 4 or 5 and 10 and 11, and you want to try and start cutting it back, right? And here's the thing that most parents do not want to hear. And it's the same thing they tell you on the airplane, is they put your own oxygen mask on first. Kids are brilliant. They will know. My mom thought she was hiding something with her stash, and she couldn't understand why it would slowly disappear. But they are brilliant. They know that you are doing as they, what's the saying? Don't do as I do, do as I say, kind of thing. They know that you're actually using sugar in different forms. And they want part of what you're doing. My father used to tell me, don't drink, and I'm like, that didn't help me much. And so what I'm getting to is that I'm not below, or I don't know how it is, below or above. I'm not below using this weapon. One of the things I've found I'm trying to institute it. If someone finds out they're pregnant, they can literally quit, like even if they have a substance use disorder, they have a drinking problem or a drug problem, that day, that hour, they quit the substance that they were abusing because they found out they were pregnant, right? We need to transfer this over to the sugar thing. And parents need to realize this, okay? And when they do realize it, their life is going to change. Their children's lives are going to change. They really just need to do it first. We have a couple coaches who have got their kids off sugar, and they start, like I said, they, like your kids did, they start to be the teacher. They start to say, we don't eat sugar at our house. And this is why. Because you've sat down with them, you've explained it to them, and you don't use sugar anymore. And so they are, right on board with it. They want to do what's going on in the family, what mom and dad are doing, right? So that's what you got to do. You've got to go first, and you've got to be authentic and genuine about it, and not just try and get your kids off sugar. You've got to start with yourself.
And I like the point you made about talking to them about it. So by all means, we do use some sugars. We'll use maple syrup or honey, but we talk about the effects of sugars, even with my 4-year-old and my 2-year-old who does not fully understand what it is. But we talk about how it doesn't help us grow, and it doesn't help us from getting sick and those kinds of things. And I think actually just opening up the discussion with kids helps a lot, because they're more perceptive than we give them credit for.
Right.
So I think that's probably the best start for moms is just talk about it. Talk about what it does, talk about why you don't want them to eat it, and get them to make the link between sugar and how their body feels. So I know that one takes a little bit, but what I've noticed is when my daughter has had sugar now, she'll get a stomach ache. And we'll talk about why she has a stomach ache. And then it's obviously leads back to, well, this is what happens when your body's not used to sugar and you have it, it hurts your tummy. And I think that alone has made a huge difference in kind of her understanding of why we don't consume sugar a lot. Right. Is because it does nothing for us.
Sure.
So I think that's probably a good start too with moms. Now, what are a couple of things that we can do to keep sugar out of our kids' diets long term? So that is my biggest fear is my girls are really awesome now, but what about when they're 8 and 10 and 12 and
they're out in the world? Yeah. Well, one thing I do, and I'm going to answer that question, but I do feel drawn to tell you about is the maple syrup and the honey. I do want you to, and all your audience, to research fructose. And this is the last 5 years and the brain reward chemical stuff. The fructose in honey and the fructose in maple syrup is no different than the fructose in Coca-Cola.
Nope,
it's
breaks
the
down
same.
the same.
So yeah, check into that. But the answer to your question is, if you've done the beginning right, you've got to let it go at some point. Like, I'll tell you a story what happened when they were 6 years old. And what happened was we were at a roller skate. My mother used to tell me I was a perfect angel. I'm like, wow, come on, all moms say that. And it's like, no, when you would fall asleep, your hair would get wet and there would be a halo around your head on the wet pillow from the sweat. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of cute. Well, I had never seen this in my children till 6 years old. So we're at a roller skating rink. And they were twins, so there's two of them. But the cake and ice cream comes out, and both of their heads, they look up. You know, what can we this time? They didn't even have to say anything. We knew it was loud there. We couldn't even hear them, but we knew what they were asking, and we just gave in. We were tired at this point. You know, they had started school, and we were fighting that, and so they had the cake and ice cream. So for the first time, I walk into the room. You probably know where the story's going. I walk into the room, 2 wet heads on 2 wet pillows, wet hair, wet T-shirt, and halo around their head. They were in sugar withdrawals, right?
Yeah.
And so it's very real. And in order to, so then at every birthday party we would get it, and the same thing would happen. They'd be sick or whatever. And I think if you graph it out, if you map it out, if you have a long period of no sugar and then they have it, and you see the wildness and then you see the crash and you see the irritability, you'll start to understand that you are affecting the emotions of your children and you'll cut it back. But at some point you've got to let it go, you know. And by the time my kids were 9, 10, 11, 12, they were going out to birthday parties, and I would say, you know, remember, no sugar, light on the pound, you know, and they would say, yeah, we know, Dad, we know, no problem. And they would, you know, what they did at that point. But I think our job is pretty much done at 6, 7, 8, 9. If we've really laid that foundation and they don't have that draw in their brain reward systems, if they don't know that they can feel better, and kids don't know that they're doing this to themselves, and parents don't know that they're doing it to themselves or to their children. They don't realize that they're changing their brain chemicals and they're managing the difficult parts in their lives. When they're upset, hurt, scared, worried, or afraid, they are managing this by ingesting a substance. When you kind of really put those two things together, then parents understand, right? They understand what this drug is doing to themselves and to their children. And the longer they can keep them off it, the better their long-term prospects of growing into a healthy adult are.
I do have to trust them at some point.
Yeah.
No, my girls are pretty good. Like they are pretty good, mainly because we've talked about the effects of it, I think.
Yeah.
One thing I lastly wanted to note for mamas who are kind of starting out on the eliminate sugar switch, it is a hard one. You are going to have to be patient. It is a very addictive substance. And I think that one of the best swaps you can start to make is, well, making your own stuff. try not to buy and just kind of give them something, but make it with them and make it yourself. And use fruit instead of sugar as a sweetener to start. So using bananas or dates or those kinds of things in your baked goods can go a long way to sweeten it so that they still enjoy it while they're doing that transition without loading up on just a bunch of honey or a bunch of maple syrup or whatever you choose. So that would probably be a good place to start. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, transition stuff, I mean, even with the adults, the fruit is, it's varied because people with heavy habits, fruit will lead them back to using, if you will. But in the transitionary times, fruit is a valuable thing. But like I kind of cautioned before, I would, keep an eye on definitely fruit juice. It would be eliminated for sure. But the high fructose, kind of high glycemic tropicals, bananas and dried fruit too is, I think, at risk for people. Dried fruit has been a substitute fruit leather, they call it. I think they have different products made out of that. If Dr. Lustig is correct, and the researchers are correct, the fructose thing is very real, and the dried fruit is no different than candy. Sadly, I'm sorry, but yeah, any transitionary foods like that would help, but you want to get to the other side quickly as best you can and have as very little fructose as you can.
One note on the dried fruits that's completely true is if you've ever actually gone to the bulk barn and looked at the ingredients in a dried fruit that you're just dried cherries or whatever you will that you're scooping into your bag, it is cherries, palm oil, and sugar.
Yeah, exactly.
They actually put sugar in the dried fruit. It drives me a little bit bananas because it's fruit. It doesn't.
All the dried bananas have sugar in it, for sure.
Oh yeah, that one's just ridiculous. So
which is crazy. They're sweet anyway.
The sweetest fruit possible, and they're still adding sugar. So
right.
Be more aware of kind of even things that seem healthy are not always what they appear, I guess, would be where I leave you.
Well, I want to warn you that you got to be a little bit of a pioneer, because society's not going to come around to this for a while. And the eternal vigilance necessary to shop, like you're talking, is really hard. You got to be really educated, get yourself really educated. But here's the thing, and I believe you're a perfect example, and I said it earlier, parents will do for their children more than they will even do for themselves or another human being, right? And so if we start to focus on if we start to make a good argument that the children are being affected, Dr. Lustig says that we have obese 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, obese babies, yep. Obese at birth, right? It's kind of crazy.
It's scary.
It's scary, yeah, and it kind of hurts my heart. So anyway, you're going to need to be a little bit of a pioneer in this thing. You're going to need a little bit of that pioneer spirit, that you're a little bit alone and help join a tribe. One of the fastest things we've ever done is we put a little Facebook group on the Sugar-Free Kids up, and we got a whole bunch of moms in like no time joining. So if you want to tell the folks about that, that'd be cool. I
love it. We will link to those in the show notes.
Yeah, Sugar-Free Kids.
So I think we are going to have to wrap it up there, because otherwise I could probably talk about sugar for the next few hours, to be perfectly honest.
I know, you and me both, right?
I just have so many opinions on it and so many questions. But I just can't express how passionate I am about keeping kids healthy. And to do that, we need to focus more on quality foods and less on packaged processed ones. So remember, mamas, you don't need to be perfect, but every mini swap you make is a huge positive step. So you got this. Michael, thank you millions for jumping on today and sharing your expertise regarding how to cut sugar. I really appreciate you coming on and love that there's such an amazing advocate out there to help people kick the sugar habit. So for all of you looking to connect with Michael, you can find him at sugaraddiction.com or on Facebook at Quit Sugar Now, and I will link to those in the show notes for you. I'll also link to all of his other social channels, so you can head to fitasmombear.com and grab those, as well as the list of resources we touched on today, because you did mention a lot of books, which is amazing. And remember, if you're in need of fitness tips, workouts, and amazingly healthy recipes, check out my website at www.fitasmamabear.com. On that note, check back soon to catch the next episode of the Fit as a Mama Bear podcast. And if you took one lesson from today's podcast, I hope it's that making healthy swaps is possible and each one has a big impact. You got this. Chat soon.